Hello, Infinity! I'm back, you're back, and who's ready to make some character turnarounds? As promised, I'm bringing you part 2 to my character reference sheet video. Today I'm working on references from my other world building project. Welcome to the world of Hyperfocus, a semi-superhero story set in an alternate version of Earth. People in this world possess the ability to transform into a manifestation of their inner self-image, magical girl style. A person's ability to stay in their focused form and their strength in that form are dependent on two factors: how solid a person's concept of their identity is, and how well a person can stay in a flow state, a mindset between two thoughts. Sorry if none of this makes sense. It's a concept that's easier to understand through story. Unfortunately, Hyperfocus is a lot less developed than my other story, The Offices of Liminal and Associated Spaces. Even though my original concept for Hyperfocus came first. I even tried dedicating an entire sketchbook for pre-production. Either way, I'm here now to make turnarounds for the Hyperfocus main cast, so let's get into it. First character up on the docket is our main character, Rory. For those curious, I'm using the Krita app on my tablet for this project. The first reference angle will be a direct front view. 1, because it'll be the anchor point for the rest of the angles, and 2, because it'll allow me to use the mirror tool. There are some aspects of her design that are asymmetrical, like her ponytail, but for the most part, I could just leave the mirror tool on. Symmetry from a front view is ideal. For her actual design, Rory doesn't have a proper manifested form, except for her wings, which I will explain later on. For the most part, she just wears normal gym clothes, trying to prioritize mobility over protective gear. So, in theory, her turnarounds were going to be the easiest to start with. The hardest part was picking the right colors for her knee and elbow braces. I still wanted her to have her own battle gear to wear when fighting with the rest of the team. Rory sees the damage that crime fighting can do on the body, even with a fully formed manifest, so she at least wants to try to protect her joints as best she can. I switch brushes to clean up the sketch. I normally do all of my sketching with a generic pencil style brush, and my inking with a paintbrush with a high line width variation. I find that with my messier sketches, the pencil brush will layer darker the more I go over a line, thus making my more confident strokes stand out. As for why I use the painting brush for inking, I just like it. After my first line art pass, I slap in the colors with the lasso fill tool just to make sure I'm happy with them. I go over the line art one more time, making sure I clean everything up nicely. With that, the front view is done, and now it's time to think in the third dimension. I start by selecting the color and line art layers and ooching them over. Then I try to find a pen with very little line width variation. It took me longer than I wanted to admit. The idea was that I was going to give myself some guidelines for the rest of the perspectives. It is at this point that I realized I have not actually explained what a character turnaround is. Okay, so you put your character in and you draw their design out, you put your character in and you draw all the details out, you do the hokey pokey and you turn them all around, and that's what it's all about. But in all seriousness, if you imagine your character spinning in place, and you're off to one side with a camera and took several pictures of the character as they spun, that is the idea of a turnaround. You just draw your character at several different perspectives to give yourself a 360-degree view of their design. The most common turnarounds are drawn with a front view, 2 side views, and a behind view, and occasionally 3/4 view, which are the angles between a side view and a straight front or back view. Turnarounds are especially helpful when working in animation, or if your character has a more complex design. Given the complexity of my other characters' designs, I figured it would be best to get their turnarounds done ASAP. After finishing my front view and guidelines, I start on the right profile. Surprisingly, this is one of the hardest angles for me, specifically when drawing the head area. I often misjudge the alignment of the jaw and ear to the rest of the head, and though my style is not the most realistic, I still have to be conscious of the proportions or else things start getting a little wonky. A good general rule of thumb is that the ear sits behind the halfway mark of the head between the eyebrows and the bottom of the nose. Then the jawline curves from the chin to the base of the ear, and depending on the face shape, that curve can be more angular or more rounded. When working on the rest of the body, the neck and arms tend to sit on the back half of the torso. When standing in a neutral pose, the torso itself will have a slight angle forward and the hips will have a slight angle backwards, creating an S-curve in the spine. You can make this curve as dramatic as you want, but keep in mind, the more dramatic the curve, the less realistic the drawing is going to be, to the point of potentially breaking your character's spine. Moving on to the legs, the thighs will also have a slight angle forward, meeting with the knees, and then the calf bending backwards. The neutral standing pose gives a natural bend to the leg. Without this bend, the legs look hyperextended. Then I copy the current layer and mirror the new layer horizontally. It is at this point that, yes, I am aware, Rory is pulling a smooth criminal. I was not paying attention to how my legs were angled to the body and was more focused on matching my guidelines instead. Don't worry, I do end up tweaking her pose later with the adjustment tool. After adjusting the lean, the only other edits I have to make to the left profile over the right is to redo her hair swoop. Yay, we love symmetrical designs. A perfect example of why I use the mirror tool. Another reason being that I draw slightly askew. I usually don't mind the slight tilt to my characters because I often draw them in more dynamic poses anyways, and so it's not as obvious. But when working on a reference, it's kind of important to have them stable, and the tilt becomes a lot more obvious when doing a neutral standing pose. After roughing out my sketch at the back, I toggle on the symmetry tool just to see how bad my tilt was this time. Listen. It was a sketch, it's allowed to be jank. Sure, I could have spent a lot more time making sure everything lined up perfectly, but I have 6 other characters to make references for, so this doesn't have to be perfect. A few things to keep in mind when drawing at this angle. Number 1, the arms in a neutral resting state are going to have a slight angle towards the front of the body, so based on the positioning, some of the arms are going to be cut off from this view. Number 2, don't forget to indicate the behind. Even if your character does not have copious assets, indicating the rear will help with the positioning of the legs. Even a simple line can help greatly. And number 3, depending on if you want to get fancy or not, when drawing the feet, you can do just the heels, or you can apply stance and posture by drawing a small sneak peek of the front of the foot as well. Most people don't stand with their feet at a perfect 90-degree angle from their body. A more common posture is to have the toes pointed slightly away from each other for better balance. However, on the flip side, toes slightly pointed together can give off the appearance of a shy character. That, or they just really need to use the bathroom. Third quarter view is where things start getting a little tricky, because I also have to consider perspective, which brings in a small amount of foreshortening. Foreshortening being the technique that artists use to imply depth. By adjusting the proportions based on their relative distance to the viewer, objects that are closer to the viewer may appear larger and vice versa. Fundamentally, I understand the concept, but I'm still working on putting it into practice, which got confusing with the guidelines I had given myself. I was trying to match up all of her joints with the line, but in reality, her limbs furthest away from the viewer would actually appear slightly smaller and would fall slightly above the guidelines I had given myself. I can usually place the shoulders on a direct side view, but something with the third quarter views threw me through a loop. I can never seem to figure out whether or not the back shoulder can be seen by the viewer. Then there are the knee braces, which gave me the most grief. Not only was I misjudging where her knee would actually go, but I was also forgetting that the brace itself would also have to shrink with the leg. For the longest time, I could not figure out why the knee braces at this angle kept taking up her entire leg. If it wasn't obvious, I wouldn't classify myself as an artistic master. I'm going to have to put this angle in the needs more practice pile. After I got all the perspectives lined and colored, I arranged all the Rorys in a summoning circle because it was the only way I could fit all the perspectives on one canvas. Honestly, I should have just left the layers as they were because it's really hard to see all the details at this size. But it's time for wings and lore. The reason why Rory's design looked so simple is that her manifest is incredibly unstable. If you remember, a person's ability to go into their manifested state is based on their confidence in their identity, and Girly has some identity issues. Force her to face the voices in her head, and her thoughts can get very dissociative very fast. Is she just an amalgamation of everyone else's expectations of her and not a real person? Are her thoughts truly her own? Sometimes she can't even recognize reality itself, unable to convince herself that she's real and not just a figment of someone else's imagination. She also is significantly less trained with her ability because she manifests late in life, and has no formal training before the plot picks up with her joining the team. So for the most part, she just looks like a plain old normie, all except for her wings. So what exactly is Rory's manifestation? I don't really know yet. Like I said, this story is significantly less developed. My general idea is that when Rory enters a flow state, instead of her manifest projecting a form over her, she manipulates the energy that forms the manifest itself in the first place. The energy ends up looking like weird oily blobs, often shifting in shape and color. Without giving away any spoilers, every time she tries to force her manifest to take a proper form, it ends terribly. So naturally, she just keeps large amounts of her energy pulled out around her to be manipulated with ease, eventually settling in the vague shape of wings. I wasn't worried about drawing the wings at every angle because they don't have a consistent form, but I did want to make sure that I had the concept represented at least once. It is a reference sheet after all. Alrighty, who's ready to meet the rest of our cast? Starting off with the great leader of our team, Hattie. She's the one who pulls Rory into a life of superheroism. I thought it would be incredibly funny for the mature and responsible leader of the team to have a full mech suit as a manifest. Her original design leaned more fox-like, but that all started to change when I gave her civilian form curly hair. In the end, I feel like the lion motifs suit her character way better. She just wants a better life for her and her pride, protecting them the best she can. Hatteras, aka Hattie, tried to scheme her way into a better life. She was once very high up in the secret government branch that manages the teams of manifested personnel. Some individuals with more subtle combat or surveillance coded manifests do get pulled into other branches, but for the most part, the main branch acts as civil servants. Of course, always serving the greater good can also be very taxing. And once Hattie hit a certain age, she decided she wanted out. But she couldn't take anyone else with her if she left. So instead, she proposed to form her own team that would cover a dead zone in a small suburban town. The idea was that her team wouldn't be put into any real danger because nothing major would happen in this area. Sorry, Hattie, you'll not be getting the peaceful retirement you wanted anytime soon. Cinder is my pseudo-rival when Rory first joins the team, sort of filling the role of the Lancer in the 5-man band trope. Yes, I understand it's a team of 7 and not of 5, but it gets the point across. Anyways, Cinder was being directly trained under Hattie, so when Hattie formed her own group, Cinder was the first to volunteer to join. Something interesting about Cinder is that her manifest shows that you don't have to have a positive self-image to have a strong manifest. You just have to have a strong sense of self. Cinder is a perfectionist, always wanting to live up to the expectations she thinks other people have for her. To reflect that, her power is metamorphosis. When in her flow state, she can will a fundamental part of herself to change. If she needs to fly, she can make herself lighter than air. If she needs to be stronger, she gains more muscle mass, etc. Of course, this has the danger to be way too OP, but I've already thought of that. She can have a powerful manifest, but it's hard for her to maintain her flow state. As it stands now, she can't rapidly change between alterations, and she can only hold multiple alterations if they're ones she already uses regularly, like muscle memory. Going beyond that will knock her straight out of her flow state, and outside of Rory, Cinder has the hardest time transforming in the first place, which contributes even more to her self-hatred. If you can't tell, this is my story of indulgence in angst, but it's not true angst if we don't have hope to balance it out. Everybody meet my ball of sunshine, G! I don't want to play favorites, but I love G so much. G sits on the complete opposite of the hyperfocus spectrum. They are almost always in some form of flow state. Not because they're an airhead or anything, but because they couldn't bear the thought of dismissing their mythical creatures. Rather than having one core version of their manifest is kind of split. G learned to care for all the aspects of themselves as separate aspects of their identity. In return, those aspects became the creatures that care for G. Squee is the most present of all the creatures, being the manifest of G's most conscious mind. Next up is the bear-coded version of their manifest, the Protector. The snake-coded manifest is for healing and self-preservation. The bird manifest is for inspiration and imagination, also giving G the ability to fly. And finally, there's the cat-coded version of their manifest, for anger. For being the youngest of the group, G actually has a rather healthy view of themselves. believing that all aspects of themselves at one point served a purpose. However, if that aspect turns out to be rather harmful, they release it like a feral animal back into the wild. Julie is a performer. She is almost always wearing her alien headphones even when manifested, and she is still trying to make the perfect battle playlist. Ironically enough though, she is a strong silent type, personality-wise. I don't know, man. I understand that it sounds like I just contradicted myself, but that's Julie. I'm having a really hard time trying to figure out how to best explain her as a character. Like, she's always moving and jamming, but when interacting with the team, she doesn't say much. Not that she has stage fright or isn't friendly. In fact, she's very friendly. She just doesn't talk unless she has something she can only convey with words. It all makes sense in my head. She's a performer, but she's a strong silent type. For her design, I based it off of a costume design I fell in love with. It was from the masquerade scene of a live performance of The Phantom of the Opera. I'm telling you, that song became my vocal stem for a month after that. And I was obsessed with the high-low skirt paired with the band jacket. Chef's kiss. My idea for her in battle was to have a baton that summons stanzas of music to whip around the battlefield and incapacitate bad guys. Either way, I really love her design. I wouldn't say that it's my favorite, but it's definitely up there. Chris Chadson. He chose that name himself. Those of you who watched my Inktober video may have already seen him. Yep, he's the one I put in a trunk. Naturally, he is the goofy older cousin no one asked for, but everybody needs. Fun fact, he is the only one of the team who can't fly using their manifest. He gives off the vibes that he's not taking the mission seriously. However, this man has seen some things. His manifest was very cowboy themed. However, due to his natural talent as a marksman, he was placed in a more hostile branch and is still trying to heal from those scars. Which is why his manifest looks more like a blend of military and cowboy. And yes, a bit on the nose, but that's also why his color scheme is red. His manifest also obscures most of his face because he doesn't want to be recognized as the monster he thinks he's become. I wanted the mask itself to look like a combination of a gas mask and a dog mouth. Also leaning into the fact that Chris might still see himself as a military dog. Chris was about to be sent out on another tour when he was transferred into Hattie's team instead. He only ended up joining at the request of Blue. Lou Levine. Chris's childhood friend and life partner. Right-hand man to Hattie and gentle older brother figure to the rest of the team. This man is a giant nerd. Hence why his manifest comes out as a wizard. And yes, I do understand that having a wizard in my superhero story could lead to some power scaling issues, but fear not. The way Blue gets his spells is incredibly convoluted. Prepare yourself. So in order to get a spell, Blue must first come up with the verbiage and hand sigil he would use to cast the spell. He can only have one spell of a specific type as well. So the healing spell he came up with as a kid to fix a small cut is the only healing spell he can ever have. But he can come up with a spell to raise the dead because technically that's necromancy. He has to be able to say the spell and draw the sigil with his hands or his focus, which is the wand. And he gave himself these limitations subconsciously because with great power comes great responsibility. And also, if it's not broken, don't fix it. Sure, he has the time to study, and he does try to come up with new spells every now and again, but in the heat of battle, he will always go back to what he knows will work. So he could have been a little OP, but not nearly as world-breaking. As for his actual visuals, I have a love-hate relationship with his design. I don't know what about it is bugging me, but something's off, and I may have to change it in the future. Okay, this video would not be complete without mentioning Nanik. Nanik is not the main villain of my story, but will be making regular appearances. Girly Pop is crazy and just wants you to join her in her delusional bliss. I don't want to show my hand just yet, so that's all you're really getting in her backstory for now. Sorry. As for her design, yes, she is basically a manic pixie dream girl. Listen, some of my favorite characters in media are the chaotic weirdos that are there just to mess with the minds of the main cast, or even the minds of the viewer. I don't know what it is, I just think they're neat. Also, Nanik is bald, both in and out of her manifested form. So if you see me drawing her with pink hair, just know that it's a wig. And yes, in her manifested form, her eyebrows turn into eyes she actually sees out of, and her original eyes are used to peer into the chaos bubble she creates. She is really horrifying in concept. When fighting her, it gets to the point that you can't tell what's real anymore. She is going to be a nightmare, especially when dealing with Rory, whose concept of reality already hangs on by a thread. I am so excited to start working on the battles and the adventures of Nanik and the rest of the Hyperfocus cast. If you're just as hyped as I am for Hyperfocus, or you're a fan of my other story, The Offices of Liminal and Associated Spaces, consider dropping a like or telling me who your favorite character is in the comments. If you seek even more chaos, consider a subscribe. I can also be found across the Webiverse on Cara, Bluesky, and Instagram. Thank you so much for joining me in my little pocket of the internet. See you later. Okay, bye.